John Cordy, and we all know that the rules are there to be broken, except for the laws of the ocean, which obviously need to be respected. Clearly, just look at Jaws and Deep Blue Sea. You saw what happened there. Right. So, first advice that you might kind of get when you grab a new modeler, whether it's a Helix or an HX Stomp or Headrush or whatever, Fractal FM3, Axe-Fx, all these things. Generally solid advice, I think, is to try to recreate the rig that you're familiar with. So if you've got a Fender Deluxe Reverb and that's been your go-to amp for the last 10 years, to me it doesn't make much sense to then jump across to your Helix and suddenly be playing around with a Friedman BE overdrive. To me that doesn't make too much sense, because you're not necessarily familiar with that amp, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. So initially, when you're creating your first patches for the Helix or whatever device you're using, I think it's generally good advice to kind of try and stick to some things that you know, and generally try to recreate things as they would be in the real world. So if you normally use a tube screamer and a flanger into the front of your Fender Deluxe Reverb, why not try and start off from that point? Now, what you'll also realise is that there's plenty of rules that you can break within the Helix world, and that's kind of what this video is going to be about. Some interesting ways that I've found that you can break the rules and the kind of results that can come from that. The very first one, and this might be useful if you've not quite got your head around snapshots yet. When you come to add distortion to a clean sound, so a fully clean sound, and if I kick on some distortion, this is a Top Secret OD in front of that. Quite spiky, right, I think. So, what could we do to combat that? Well, two things we could do really. You could adjust your high cut on your IR or your cab. So here's that adjusted down to sort of maybe 5k. Go down further to sort of 4. So yeah, that has an impact. You can change things that way. Another thing you could do though is just try to move that distortion to a different place. So without again, here's with in front of the amp, and here's, if we move this between the amp and the IR, and it's got a kind of completely different feel and sound. So that's just one small thing you could do. So chuck your drive pedal between the amp and your cab. That's something that you can do, and it generally has a little bit less of a fizziness to it. Definitely has a different sound to the other direction, and can work for some stuff. That's something that I used to use with the Hode Tone, or Hot One, however you pronounce it, Ampero. I used to put a tube screamer between the amp and the cab, and this tip came from a friend of mine whose name rhymes with Ross Haley, and he happens to maybe have some connection with Yamaha and Line 6. But anyway, so that's one way that you can change things up. So another thing you could do, I'm not showing it there, kid. Something worth bearing in mind is that, so this is the litigator amp that I'm using. So something that you wouldn't necessarily see done often, certainly not in the real world unless you're watching Eric Johnson, is the treble control turned all the way down and presence all the way down. So that's what's going on with this patch, amongst other things. I can bring in the treble and you'll hear. And bring in the presence. And you can hear that's affecting the tone. So don't be afraid to set things that sort of look a little bit extreme. Listen with your ears. Again, this comes to like the high cut stuff. So this has got a high cut of 3.9 kilohertz. And to me that's kind of a nice smooth dark tone that when I kick to the bridge pickup has that kind of tone that I'm after. So yeah, don't be afraid to experiment with settings that might be unusual. You know, extreme high cuts can sometimes work. Extreme treble and presence settings, you know, like lower end can sometimes work to get rid of some of the fizzy stuff that can happen. So don't be afraid to check out some extreme effectively settings. Now another thing worth doing, I think, is worth using certain preamps. So you'll notice you've got Helix amps and you've also got Helix preamps, which are just the preamp section of an amp, so not the power amp section, so not EL84 tubes or 6L6 tubes. We're effectively just dealing with the preamp section of an amp. You can chuck that in front of another amp as like a drive pedal. So here we are doing that. I'm chucking a placated dirty preamp in front of that litigator setting, and here's so here's without with. So it's like adding pick attack and drive, but in a way that I think sounds pretty neat. So here's without again. So again, experiment with that sort of thing. If there are kind of amps that you think, oh, I wonder what that would sound like paired with that, don't be afraid to use the kind of preamp section as a drive pedal effectively is what I'm doing. So worth trying. Another thing that I like to do to kind of try and add some chewiness to a drive pedal is to put it before the compressor. So if I have a compressor on a signal chain, often experiment with putting the drive before the compressor, which is not necessarily what you would do in the real world, but it kind of works quite nicely and adds some kind of more chewiness to drive pedals if that's something that's lacking. I'm not going to demonstrate that here, but that's something worth trying. So you've got your normal signal chain with an amp and reverb and all that stuff after. A compressor would normally go at the start of your chain or nearer to the start, and drives perhaps after it. Try switching those around so your drive goes into a compressor and then on to the signal chain. I think that works quite nicely as well. And the one last thing that I'd suggest you could experiment with is just chucking a drive pedal into an IR. Instead of running amp simulations and stuff, you can just try this. So the Legendary drive in particular is quite good for this. So you don't necessarily need to use the amp at all, or an amp at all. You can just use kind of drive pedals into IRs, and that's got a different kind of thing to it as well. there it is. Those are some of the rules that you can break with the Helix, and I think worth trying this stuff once you've got your head into the Helix world a little bit. There's no reason, for instance, why you can't just have a drive pedal straight into an IR. There's no reason why you can't have a preamp into an IR. There's no reason you can't use a preamp into a real amp simulation into an IR, and that also has a sound. There's no reason you can't have your amp, then a drive pedal, then a cab. All these things have kind of different flavours and different tones, but I think it's worth experimenting with once you've kind of got your head around the device a little bit. Experiment with breaking some of the rules. If you've got your own rules that you like to break with the Helix, specifically, let's not talk like flouting the law, drop them into the comments. It'd be cool to see some ideas floating around on this. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you want to like and subscribe, that would really help. My presets will be in the description. The one that I've been playing around with mostly today, and I'll probably do a video with this for the morning, is the HBEBined, which is 2 signal paths, one for clean and one for drive, and I think has a really kind of pretty sparkly thing going on. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers!